Hello, I'm Helen Good, and this is the Elizabethan Star Chamber. And I'm here again with some of the wonderful and generous readers from the Beyond Shakespeare Company who've kindly agreed to read another case for us. And today it's from Northumberland. Now, our readers are going to read the documents as a shared endeavor, but when we get into the witnesses, they will take a part. And reading Robert Dent is
Aliki, Chapple, half Greek, half American, currently in Lancashire, occasionally acts.
George Dent is
Rachael, Nicole, actor on the East Coast.
And James Osborne is
Liza Graham, actor, singer, and general theatre bod in London.
Andrew Thompson is
Alan Scott, no connection at all with Newcastle.
Francis Heron is
Hi, I'm Eric. I'm here.
I myself Helen will be reading Thomas Smith, and the clerk who will read the questions to the witness is
Hello. Hi, my name is Lynnn Freitas. I'm a college composition teacher coming to you from the Northwestern United States.
And the case today is Brandling and Dent. And I did have a year for it, but I don't now, but I'll tell you when I found it. All right, let us begin. And here is the bill of complaint.
To the Queen's most excellent Majesty, complaining showeth and formeth unto your Majesty your dutiful and loyal subject Robert Brandling of Felling in the county of Durham, Esquire, that whereas your said subject for diverse years the last past was and yet is lawfully seized in the sixth part of the town of Jesmond in your Majesty's county of Northumberland, and of in diverse lands, tenements, and hereditaments in the fields and precincts of the said town, and among others, one flat of arable land in the east field of Jesmond, called and known by the name of the Well Flat, where your said subject, having coal mine did to his very great charge about 2 years ago, caused to be sinked and digged one pit or shaft in one grove for the getting and drawing coals out of the said coal mines.
But now it is, most dread sovereign, that Robert Dent, George Dent, and John Dent, the sons of George Dent of Newcastle upon Tyne, having conceived a great displeasure against your subject for seeking to bring one George Dent, their father, to exemplary punishment for divers offences complained of by your subject, committed by him to the disinheriting of your subject, did grow into most extreme malice, rage, and fury against your subject. And thereupon, purposing to overthrow your subject's estate, did most riotously, routeously, and unlawfully cut down the grove which your subject had made at Jesmond for the cutting of his coals out of his mines there, for which their lewd offence and some other like lewd misdemeanours attempted and committed by them and their confederates against your subject, he complained to your Majesty's Council in the North, whereupon due proof made of their offences, they, the said Dents and their confederates, were fined and imprisoned for their sad offences.
But the said Robert Dent, George Dent the younger, and John Dent, being persons of most outrageous condition and behavior, carried away with their own violent, outrageous, and malicious affections, not having the fear of God before their eyes, nor any regard of your Majesty's most wholesome laws and statutes, nor respecting or regarding the censure of your Majesty's said council in the North, have since the same time given out speeches, that was not all, but that they would do more than that against your subject, and thereupon conspired and confederated themselves with James Osborne, Thomas Smith, and Francis Heron, being Scotsmen by birth, and such as were fit instruments for them to work their will withal against your subject.
And they did first persuade with James Osborne, being formerly used by them, to be the overman of the colliery, and by themselves and by the means of James Osborne's labored and persuaded with Smith and Heron, being men at the commandment and disposition of the Dents, having been before used in the Dents coal works, and men of base condition and lewd disposition, and therefore fit for such an action. That they, the said Smith and Heron, and other of their adherents, to your subject yet unknown, should by undermining quarry of stone, whereupon a river called Usborne did run, let the river through their wasted coal works in Biker, being a lordship next adjoining to the township of Jesmond, and divided by the same with that river where they had gotten out all the said dense coal before, and had before given over the same into your subjects' coal mine in Jesmond to drown the same.
And for that purpose, they, Thomas Smith and Francis Heron, and the other unknown persons, by the instigation, direction, appointment, and procurement of the said Robert Dent, George Dent, John Dent, and James Osborne, did begin to undermine and work down the pillars of coals that bear up the quarry of stone, whereupon the said river Osborne did run in, or about the beginning of the month of February in the 42 year of your highness' reign, and so continued hewing down the pillars of coals and undermining the quarry of stone, whereupon the river did run, until about the last day of February, then next following, at which time the quarry being undermined did crack, break, shrink, and fall down in divers places. And so the said whole river Usborne, of the greatest part thereof, did run through the cracks and breaches of the quarry into the said Dent's old and wasted coal works, where they had caused all their coals to be gotten out, and had left off working in.
Which your said subject having knowledge of, he did immediately set many workmen for making of dams, and using all possible means to have stayed the water into the Dent's old wasted works, out of your subject's new coal works. And by such dams and other means as your said subject then used to his extreme charge, he kept the water out of the coal mine until the 2nd day of the month of April then next following, at which time the water, rising to an extreme height and weight in the wasted works, broke the dams and utterly overran your subject's coal works, to your said subject's intolerable loss and damage, and to the loss of £100 per annum unto your majesty, which would have risen by the custom or imposition of 12pence to your majesty for every calder in the state of the sale of the coals, all to the great annoyance of all your majesty's subjects having any coal mines near unto the same.
And whereas further, your subject, perceiving that the said coal mine was drowned up by the running of the said river into the same, did sink another new shaft or pit in another part of his ground at Jesmond, hoping thereby to get some other part of his coals at Jesmond, and for the preservation of the new pit did build such a house over the same as some of his workmen or servants might continually dwell in, and made the walls of the said house of stone, and purposed to cover the roof thereof with fir deals that he had provided for that purpose. They, the said Robert Dent, George Dent the younger, and John Dent, perceiving the same, and thinking with themselves that if your subjects, workmen, or servants should come to dwell in the house, then they should be prevented from doing the like outrage for the overthrowing of that last pit as they had done before to the other.
And continuing their former malice against your subject, and being then more than ever before enraged against him, for that he had procured them some punishment for some of their misdemeanors, did resolve with themselves that they would outrageously overthrow that bit also, as they had before done the other, and thought with themselves that their safest course to avoid danger of law was to cause the same to be overthrown in the night time, and before the tenants came to dwell in the house. And for that purpose they did combine and confederate themselves with the said James Osborne, Thomas Smith, and Francis Heron, and with Percival Maitland, Andrew Thompson, and John Muffet, the servants of Robert Dent, and with divers other persons, to your subject yet unknown, resolving with their assistance riotously to cast down and overthrow the new coal pit.
And for that end they, Robert Dent, George Dent the Younger, James Osborne, Thomas Smith, Francis Heron, Percival Maitland, Andrew Thompson, John Muffet, and the said other unknown persons did riotously and unlawfully arm themselves with swords, daggers, mattocks, axes, hacks, and other unlawful weapons, and being so armed did assemble themselves riotously and unlawfully together unto your subjects' coal pit upon the 8th day of November in the said 42nd year of your majesty's reign, and did then and there riotously and unlawfully break down the walls of your subjects' house, which had before caused to be built, there built, and entered into the said house, and did then and there cut in pieces a pair of new ropes of 20 fathom long, and did cast the roll of the said coal pit, which was for the drawing out of the coals, into the bottom of the pit, and cut down the sheets, frame, and timber work of the coal pit, by reason whereof the sides of the pit did fall in, and the said coal pit being worth 300 pounds, which then was and yet is in great danger to be lost thereby, and cannot be recovered without great charge to your subject.
And your said subject further showeth and informeth your most excellent majesty, that Robert Dent, George Dent, and John Dent, having likewise conceived some causeless displeasure against one Richard Pitts, having been for divers years past last one of your majesty's customers of the town of Newcastle upon Tyne, did arm and array themselves with swords, daggers, and other unlawful weapons, and in the marketplace at Newcastle, upon or about the last day of April, in the 41st year of your highness' reign, and did then and there riotously and unlawfully draw out their said swords and daggers, and make a heinous assault and affray upon the said Richard Pitts, being in peaceable manner unarmed, and in his gown, near the custom house, attending your majesty's service there. And the said George Dent and John Dent did then and there with their drawn swords riotously and unlawfully give unto Richard Pitts divers grievous wounds upon his head and other places of his body, being then commanded and encouraged by Robert Dent, then and there to kill and murder Richard Pitts. Which they had most desperately and wickedly performed, if they had not been restrained from their wicked purpose therein by the aldermen and divers other of your majesty's subjects of Newcastle, who were then present.
But they, the said Robert Dent, George Dent, and John Dent, being restrained by the aldermen and magistrates of Newcastle, who were then present, and by them required in your majesty's name to put up their swords and keep your majesty's peace, were so far from submitting themselves to your majesty's authority therein, as that they did not only continue their riotous violence and outrage towards Richard Pitts, but also gave very contemptuous and reviling speeches against the magistrates, and offered violence unto the magistrates, and had surely slain and murdered them, or some of them, if they had not been restrained by divers of your majesty's subjects that were then present, and saw and heard the same. All of which said misdemeanors and offences have been procured, committed, and done, since your majesty's last free and general pardon.
In tender consideration whereof, and because the said conspiracies, riots, routs, unlawful assemblies, practices, and misdemeanors are to the great dishonor of Almighty God, and contrary to your majesty's laws, and to the great loss and hindrance of your majesty, to the grievous and intolerable damage of your said subject, and to the great annoyance of many other your majesty's subjects, and would prove most pernicious and dangerous in a civil state and Christian commonwealth, if they should escape without due punishment and due reformation. In regard whereof, and to the end that the said offenders may receive punishment due to their offenses, may it therefore please your most excellent majesty to grant unto your said subject, your majesty's most gracious several writs of subpoena, to be directed to the said Robert Dent, George Dent the Younger, John Dent, James Osborne, Thomas Smith, Francis Heron, Percival Maitland, Andrew Thompson, and John Muffet, commanding them and each of them personally to appear before your majesty in your highness most honorable court of Star Chamber, then and there to answer the premises, and to stand such further order and direction touching the premises as to your highness honorable council of that court shall be thought meet and convenient. And your said subject shall daily pray unto God for your highness in health and happiness long to reign over us.
Thank you. And may I say how amazing Liza's fast reading of that final passage was. Excellent. Right, let me make sure that I can see everybody. And who's going to make the first comment on these lovely people?
Well, the Dents sound like bad seed, if this can be believed, you know.
Yeah, Liza.
So the Dents are local, but Osborne, Smith, and Heron are Scots?
Well, they're Scottish born, but technically they're Scots. They may be resident in the county.
Yeah, I was wondering what the legalities at this point are of Scots being subject to English law, since the two kingdoms are different at this point.
Well, if there are offences committed in England, then they are subject to the English law, just as an Englishman who commits a crime in Scotland is subject to Scots law. The fact that they are Scots born is a black mark against their character. I think that has to be recognised. But only just, of course, because we now have a date. This is in the last year of Elizabeth's reign. We're talking 1603 here.
Yeah, but the Scots, essentially, there's still a lot of organized crime just north of the border.
Well, yes, I mean, there were an enormous number of Scots who were resident south of the border. Alan.
Yeah, and in fact, with Newcastle, you're not that far from the border. You know, you're only 10 or a dozen miles or so south of Hadrian's Wall. Well, no, in fact, Newcastle is the end of Hadrian's Wall. The border was probably at this time very slightly further north. But you got basically the argument against the Scots guys is not uncommon one. Oh, they're migrant labour. Must be trouble.
Yes, but I mean, as far as Northumberland are concerned, the Scots are the enemy.
Historically, certainly.
Yeah. Aliki.
Well, I'm very clear that all of civilization and certainly the Queen's queendom will break down if these men are not punished. I'm not entirely clear what their problem is with the complainant and why they went to this great deal of trouble to mess up his minds and murder people.
Well, he says it's because he complained against them for something else.
Yeah, but it seems a lot, doesn't it? Mayhem and riot and destruction and murder.
Yes, you never go to Star Chamber and say you've been mildly inconvenienced. Alan.
It's a trade dispute between two people who are both coal owners over, you know, who's got the right to exploit the land. Effectively.
Yes.
It's personal, is the best I can do with it. I mean, people may have two neighbours may both be exploiting coal on their land, but they don't have to be enemies. I think, I mean, I'm quite interested in the mechanics of it. There's this river and there's a mine, and the water gets into the mine and then gets into a neighboring mine. The other thing is that we think coal mine and we think pillars of coal being blocked and then everything caving in. We think all sorts of things about mines, but we're thinking very 19th century. There was no electricity. There were no drills. Everything was done by pick, shovel, and a bit of gunpowder.
So there's a limit to how deep you can go. These must be fairly open mine workings. And
Well, yes, except that they actually go under the river.
Well, is that what happened? They're under the river. It's not that they
Well,
diverted.
no, sorry, we'll discover later that in fact there was they were mining underneath. You see, there were galleries because the galleries were being held up because they'd left pillars of coal or whatever.
I heard that. Yeah.
So it wasn't just a shaft; it was shaft and gallery. But I mean, when you think of the work that it must have taken, Eric.
Yeah, I was just going to say, well, I mean, I've not studied rivers or digging or that kind of thing, but I mean, based on stuff that I've read about Salisbury Cathedral and that kind of thing, wouldn't they have issues with the water table as well, digging near the river? So that would be just kind of, yeah. Whenever it rained, it would just flood. I'm assuming.
Well, I don't know what the water table's like there, but I mean, we've got stone. We've got a river on top of stone, on top of coal.
It depends, I think, on the type of stone. I mean, miners, at the time they used all the technology and knowledge at their command. It wasn't a primitive art. It was something with a long history, and they'd spent a long time figuring things out.
And there was a lot of German expertise that that had been imported. Hello, Rachael.
I was gonna say, if they're using coal for like heating and powering things at this time, the riotous and the unlawfulness, I think, might be a little more depending on the season, because it's not just for the buying and selling, but for keeping people warm in the winter, if it's a major thing for the area.
Yes, most of this coal would be exported to London. London had pretty well run out of firewood.
Okay.
And also all the metalworking, the armament factories, the bakers would still be using wood, I think, because coal would smell too badly. But it was known as sea coal because it came to London by sea. But there were mines in the Midlands too. And there were mines in the Kingdom of Fife in Scotland.
And Cornwall, right? They're mining tin at this point?
They're mining tin there. But there's a lot of coal, but the trouble with the coal from Fife is that it's very poor quality. But it's good for salt making and stuff. Okay, are we any more thoughts? Hello, Eric.
I did enjoy the touch of like, they ruined the coal mine, therefore I can't pay the taxes that you usually would for such a thing, because I don't have the money from the coal mine in order to sort of
well, it's a purchase tax, a sales tax. I'm not sure how much a cholder of coal is. But
it seems to me another way of trying to get the trying to get them to bring the case to court is to
Yeah.
say, you're losing tax revenue because these people screwed up my coal mine.
Yes, yes, yes. And of course, the government was extremely keen on promoting coal industry. It was useful. Alan.
Yeah, it's potential tax revenue loss rather than actual. It's not someone saying, oh, they've done this, so I can't pay my tax. It's because I can't extract the coal, you're going to lose out on the duty on it.
Mm, 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 mm. But there isn't much in the way of witnesses. I mean, he's saying water flooded. I think it flooded. It was let in deliberately by these people. He's saying my house, which I perched above the mine, was destroyed, but he's not saying that anyone observed it. Who knows? Anyway, shall we push on to some answers? Is that Rachael?
Wait, so he has no proof that they actually did it? Nobody saw, there's no witnesses, and that's why they're giving all this character stuff of like a fight at a market and like saying that there's dots?
Well, I've no doubt the fight at the market was witnessed by practically the entire population, but he's not for the mining stuff. He's not putting it in. I mean, the fight at the market, as someone pointed out in chat, was it you, Eric, is in fact earlier than the mining problems. So it is very much a character thing. Because the magistrate, if there is a problem there, the magistrates of Newcastle will be perfectly competent to deal with it. And people who go around assaulting customs officers were dealt with fairly harshly.
Not good.
Okay, right. So the next thing we do, we have two answers, and we'll deal with the small fry first. The answer of Thomas Smith, Francis Heron, Andrew Thompson, and John Muffet, defendants, to the bill of Robert Brandling, complainant.
The said defendants, saying, and every one of them severally for himself saith, that the said complainant, rather of a troublesome and malicious disposition, as they verily think, to vex and molest these defendants and to undo them by unreasonable charges in the law, some of them being but poor serving men and others of them laborers in collieries and coal mines, then of or for any just cause or good ground of suit, hath exhibited and persecuteth his said slanderous bill against them in this most honorable court. Nevertheless, the said defendants for answer saying, and every one of them severally for himself saith, that as to all and singular riots, unlawful assemblies, practices, conspiracies, and misdemeanors in the said bill, mentioned jointly or severally laid to these defendants, charge whereto they ought to make answer, and which are examinable in the most honorable court, they and every of them are not and is not thereof, nor of any part thereof guilty in manner and form, as in the said bill is very untruly suggested. All which matters these defendants are ready to aver and prove as this honorable court shall award, and praying, and every of them prayeth to be dismissed with his honorable costs and charges in this behalf wrongfully sustained.
All right. That's fairly clear. This is a vexatious and malicious men. We are poor, humble coal miners. Help! And costs and charges, please. It seems fairly plain. There are two other missing answers, both of which go into enormous detail about the ruckus in Newcastle with the customs man. But what they fundamentally say is, it didn't happen, it wasn't me, he didn't mind, or words to that effect. You know, your standard 3 defenses. And anyway, it's already been dealt with in court, is I think what it mostly says, as I remember. All right, we now got the plea and answer of Robert Dent, gentleman, and James Osborne, 2 of the defendants of the bill of complaint of Robert Brandling, Esquire, complainant.
The defendants do say upon their oaths that both the complainant and the defendants are inhabiting and dwelling within the jurisdiction of Her Majesty's Council established in the north, and do all inhabit and do usually abide in the counties of Northumberland, Newcastle upon Tyne, and Durham, and some of them very far distant from London. And for as much as Her Majesty, of her gracious clemency, for the ease of her subjects' travel and charge, dwelling in those far and remote counties, hath established a council in the north, before whom matters the nature and qualities are contained in the bill are probably determinable, being but, as they are alleged and set forth by the complainant's own supposition, riots of small importance and concerning trifles, they pray to be dismissed. And these defendants further say that there hath been heretofore suit before Her Majesty's said council, prosecuted by the means of the complainant against some of these defendants, for and concerning some of the misdemeanours and matters mentioned in the bill. And now, for the further vexation and greater trouble of these defendants complained of here, all which matters these defendants are ready to aver and prove, as this honourable court shall award, and humbly pay to be dismissed with their costs and charges in this behalf wrongfully sustained.
Thank you. Now, I mean, this is jurisdiction of the Council of the North. It's a lot of stuff about nothing, and the Council of the North is the right place for it, because we live at the other end of the world. How many of you have heard of the Council of the North? Oh, yeah. Oh, probably from me. No, that's not true. The thing about the Council of the North is that its records are vitally important for the history of the north of England during this period and earlier. And they are an absolute treasure trove of cases, decisions, discussions, whatever, and they're all irretrievably lost. We haven't got any of them. They were all blown up in the siege of York in the Civil War, or so we are told, but they just don't exist. And I always think of it as a bit like a subcommittee of the Privy Council. The Privy Council had an offspring, 2, one in Wales, one in the north, and they mirrored the Privy Council, while of course not coughing without permission. But at this time, the president of the Council of the North was the 2nd Lord Burleigh, who was the older brother of Robert Cecil. And he was actually in the north. He wasn't in London. He was actually sitting in York because they were waiting for Queen Elizabeth to die, at which point his job was to make sure that James, the King of Scots, got to London. Sole function of Thomas Cecil, 2nd Lord Burleigh. But in the interim, as president of the Council of the North, he had his own court in which cases were continually being held. And there are enormous numbers of references to cases brought before the Council of the North in every part of the North. Lincolnshire wasn't in the north. So all of those cases we were reading in Lincolnshire are from the south. But no, but he has a point, except that people did appeal from the Court of the Council of the North, which was a prerogative court like Star Chamber, and they did appeal from there to Star Chamber. Because Star Chamber did not really care whose jurisdiction they trod on.
Right.
But I mean, what they're doing is they're minimizing it. I mean, if it was true, it would be industrial sabotage and assault and God knows what. But they're saying it's, oh, riots, but only trifling riots.
Little riots.
Yeah, not worthy of Star Chamber. Insufficiently important riots. Sorry, I've gone on a bit because I wanted to get that thing in about Star Chamber. But what do we got? Anything else before we go on? Because we're now, Eric.
So this case would have sort of bypassed the Council of the North, or did it just go through the Council of the North to the Star Chamber?
Well, Brandling he may be actually bringing a parallel case in the Council of the North. You never know with these things. They go all over the place. I mean, if he's claiming that the Queen is suffering a pecuniary loss, there is the potential of getting it into the Court of Exchequer. I mean, there are all sorts of things he could be doing. But it looks as if he's decided that he's got enough to take it to Star Chamber. And of course, as they point out, by going to Star Chamber, he is putting them to additional expense and trouble.
Yeah, because then they'd have to also turn up in London at some point.
Well, if it gets heard, they'd have to turn up in London.
Oh, wow.
And anyway, they'd have to employ a Star Chamber lawyer to put in their answers. So, yeah, it's all fun, but I mean, this is a case that I find it very difficult to get my head around. The sheer appallingness of mining in the early modern period, and the fact that the early modern people just didn't seem to have the habit of cooperation. You know, irrepressibly litigious.
Well, they're very clannish, aren't they? They cooperate within their own clan and clique, and everyone else can be hanged.
What friends thou hast, and their adoption tried. You know, yes.
Grapple them to thy soul with hoops of steel.
What it is to be among people who know what one is talking about. Okay, shall we pass on to the witness statements? And here are your witnesses. What we're going to do is each of our actors are going to read out the name and description of the person that they are dealing with, and then our friend Lynnn is going to start the interrogatories. So here we go. Here are your witnesses.
Robert Dent of Bycar in the county of Northumberland, gentleman.
George Dent of the town of Newcastle upon Tyne in the county of the same town, gentleman of the age of 35 years.
James Osborne of the said town of Newcastle upon Tyne, yeoman of the age of 35 years, or thereabouts.
Andrew Thompson of St. Lawrence in the parish of All Saints, within the liberties of the town of Newcastle upon Tyne, yeoman of the age of threescore years or thereabouts.
Francis Heron of the said town of Newcastle upon Tyne, yeoman of the age of 24 years or thereabouts.
And I'm Thomas Smith of the town of Newcastle upon Tyne, yeoman of the age of 40 years or thereabouts.
Interrogatories to be ministered to the defendants to the bill of complaint of Robert Brandling, Esquire, complainant. Did Andrew Thompson and Thomas Steele, by the commandment of Robert Dent, the defendant, cut down a grove within the lordship of Jesmond in the county of Northumberland, which was for the getting of the coals of the complainant at Jesmond? And was the complainant in quiet possession thereof by the space of 3 years before the same was so cut down? And did Robert Dent, after the grove was so cut down, speak thereof, saying that that was not all, for that the complainant should have more done to him than that, or words tending to that effect?
As concerning the pulling or cutting down of the grove by the now complainant's own showing in his bill now exhibited into this honourable court against me, that he hath heretofore for the same cause complained against me before her Majesty's Council at York, and that I have been there fined and imprisoned for the same. For which cause I refer myself to the opinion of this honourable court, whether I shall be again compelled to answer the same matters. And therefore I refuseth to make any further answer to these interrogatories, unless I shall be otherwise ordered to do so by this honourable court.
Did George Dent and John Dent, since the grove was hewn down, offer to shoot a gun or guns at the complainant? And whether did George Dent then say in your hearing at that time that they, meaning George and his brethren, hoped to see the complainant not worth a groat, or any speeches tending to that effect?
I am not bound to answer, as it is not relevant to the misdemeanors wherewith he is charged by the complainant's bill.
I am not to make answer to that interrogatory because it is not mentioned in the bill, but I never used any such speeches to the best of my knowledge that I hoped to see the complainant Robert Brandling not worth a groat.
Had the Dents, or some of them at the coal works, 20 work folks or thereabout, about the getting of coals at the coal pit in Bicar in the county of Northumberland, at or near the side of a certain brook or river called Usborne, and for the most part of the space of a whole year before the beginning of the month of February in the 42nd year of Her Majesty's reign. And had the Dents also an engine in the coal pits for the drawing of water out of the coal pit for the most part of a year before the beginning of that February? And did not the Dents, or some of them, or their overmen for them, cause the engine for the drawing of water and the most part of the said work folks to be taken from the coal pit near Usborne to another coal pit near the water of the Tyne, about a quarter of a mile lower, before or about the midst of the said month of February? And did the Dents and James Osborne, their overmen, or any of them, give out speeches upon the removing of the engine and the workmen, that they would get no more coals in the coal pit near unto the Usborne, but in the coal pit near the water of Tyne?
I, with my partners in coal works, had about the number of 20 work folks about the getting of coals at a coal pit in Bicar in the county of Northumberland, at or near the side of the brook or river called Usborne, and for the space of 3 or 4 years before the beginning of the month of February in the 42nd year of Her Majesty's reign. And I, with partners and also the lords of Jesmond, had an engine at the said coal pits for the drawing of water out of those coal pits for the most part of a year and a half before the beginning of February, and saith that I and my partners before or about the midst of the month of February, at such time as the water came so extremely upon their work folks at the said coal pit that they were enforced to leave work, and did cause one James Osborne, their overman, and their work folks to go to another coal pit near to the water of Tyne, about a quarter of a mile from the coal pit near Osborne. And I do not remember that I, or Osborne, or any other, upon the moving of the said engine and work folks, gave out speeches that they would get no more coals in the said coal pit near Osborne, but in the coal pit near the water of Tyne. But I am assured that they have got no more coals since that time in the coal pit near Osborne, by reason of the overflowing of the water into the pit, which overflowing, I believe, happened by the means of the complainant, or some of his servants, as I hope to prove and make manifest to this honourable court.
I know that the defendants had part of certain coal pits in the said burn called the Usburn, and also had part of an engine there, and the engine was removed from a coal pit called the High Pit in Usborne to a lower pit near the bridge end there, but by whose means I cannot depose.
Did Thomas Smith and Francis Heron, the defendants, work in the coal pit near the side of the Usburn after the most part of the workmen and the engine were removed? And how long did they so work? And did they work the pillars which bear up the quarry of stone under or near the said side of the said Usborne during that time? And who appointed them to so work? And whether did the Dents and Usborne appoint them to work as they then did? And if Usborne appointed them to do so, was it by the direction of any of the Dents?
I think that Thomas Smith and Francis Heron did work in the coal pit near the Usborne after the most part of the workmen and the engine was removed unto the other pit. But how long they wrought there, or whether they did work the pillars that bear up the quarry of stone, I do not know. Neither did they so work by my direction or appointment, but I left James Osborne to give direction in what sort they should work the pits, and whether Osborne did appoint them to work the said pillars or not, I do not know.
It's Liza.
Sorry, just finding it.
Okay. Do you want to
Thomas Smith and Francis Heron, two of the defendants, did work by my appointment in the coal pit. Is that where we are?
Yes.
Did work by my appointment in the coal pit near the side of the Usborne after the most part of the workmen and the engine was taken into the lower pit. But how long they did work, I cannot depose. They did work the pillars which bear up the quarry of stones, as commonly they used to work at other coal pits.
Who's reading Thomas Smith?
You, isn't it?
Me? Oh, I'm sorry. I and one Francis Heron, together with divers other persons, did work in the pit mentioned no longer than most of the other workmen, and the engine was removed to the lower pit. And we did work the pillars of the pit as we accustomedly work in other pits. And that work which I did was by the appointment of James Osborne, and by no other direction.
Did the quarry under the river Usborne and on that side of the dense coal mine break, crack, and fall down about the latter end of February in that same year? And did the river of Usborne, or a great part thereof, run into the dense old coal works and fill or run into most of the wasted places of the dense coal works, and thereby at the last drown up the complainant's coal works near adjoining? And were the complainant's coal works in that place drowned up before the river did so run and fall down through the breaches and cracks aforesaid near adjoining? And whether were the said complainant's coal works in that place drowned up before the said river did so run and fall down through the trenches and tracks aforesaid, and was not the said Dent's old pits thus drowned, and by the water shortly after the complainants drowned also.
Part of the quarry under the river Osborne on that side that my coal mine did crack and break down about the latter end of February same year. But by what means it fell down, I do not know. And I think that the river Osborne did run into my and my partner's old coal works and fill or run into the same. But I have not been since under the ground to see the same, nor do I know whether it did thereby at last drown up the complainants' coal works near adjoining. But I say that if the river had not drowned up the coal works, the water coming forth so abundantly, both from the complainants' coal works and from mine and my partner's, had within 14 or 20 days drowned up the works, if the river had not happened to break and fall into the works.
I do know that the quarry under the Osborne did break, crack, and fall down about the time mentioned. And as I think, the river did run into the coal works of the defendants. And I do not know that the complainant's pit was drowned before the river did so run or not. And I heard by the workman of the complainant that his pit was drowned shortly after, but how the same was so drowned, I cannot say.
I know that the quarry under the river of Osborne did crack, break, and fall down about the time mentioned. I know this to be true because I was then a workman there, and the pit of the defendants was laid in or drowned by reason of that fall, and the complainant's pit was not drowned in 3/4 of a year, after the water or river did so run as is stated, and the pit of the said complainant was not drowned by reason of the defendant's pit being drowned.
I do not know that there was any cracks in the pit of the defendants, and I did see water in the pit, but from whence it came, I cannot say. And I did not know that the pit of the complainant was drowned.
Did you, James Osborne, a little before the complainant's coal works were drowned up at Jesmond, ask and inquire of any of the complainant's servants, workmen, or any others, whether the complainant's coal works were drowned up or no? And did you say to any person or persons whatsoever that the complainant within 20 days would give £20 to be rid of the water there? And did you say that the complainant said coal pit would not cast 5 tons of coal before it were drowned up? And what were the same words, and to whom did you speak the same?
I cannot say.
Were you, James Osborne, in the complainant's coal pit at Jesmond a little before the said coal pit was drowned as aforesaid? And whether had you then any leave to do so? And for what purpose did you then come hither? And whether were you forbidden the complainant's ground by him or any of his servants, yea or no?
About 3 months. I'm sorry, I clicked on the wrong place and I lost the place. I'm really sorry.
Okay, don't worry about it. Don't worry. We'll just sort this out. James Osborne, and I'm not talking about the person reading James Osborne. James Osborne's in a mess here. He's not. That question, did you say this, and this? His answer in the original is, and to this he cannot depose. There's nothing else. And I think it's very, very strange. I mean, he could even say he has no memory of having said these things, but he's refusing to incriminate himself or to commit perjury, I think. He's out of his depth, I think, poor old Osborne. Alan.
Yeah, basically in American terms, he's taking the fifth, isn't he?
Yes, except that, of course...
Except that right didn't exist.
Yeah. I mean, the equivalent is saying, I don't know.
Don't know, Gov.
Yeah.
Okay, I found it. Sorry about the hiatus.
So the question was, have you ever been into the complainant's pit?
Yes, and were you in the complainant's pit before the flooding, right?
Yeah.
And were you forbidden to be there? So about 3 months before the pit of the complainant was drowned, I was twice in the complainant's pit by the license of some of his workmen, whose names I know not, once for to go to my own pit under the Usborne, once the other side of the same burn, by reason there was no bridge there, not within a quarter of a mile or thereabouts. And another time upon occasion that the water of the complainant's pit did burst up my own dam, and I came into the defendant's pit to see if it might be mended. I was never forbidden by the complainant or any of his servants to come into the complainant's ground.
Did the complainant, upon the drowning of the pit at Jesmond, cause another new shaft or pit to be sunk in another part of his grounds at Jesmond? And did he cause a house or the frame and walls of a house to be built and set up over the new coal pit? And were the walls of that house broken down upon the 8th day of November, 1600, in the nighttime? And were the ropes of the coal pit cut in pieces? And was the rowel of the coal pit cast into the bottom of the coal pit? And were the sheaths, frames, and timber works of the coal pit broken or cut and cast down about that time, as you know or have credibly heard?
I heard that the walls of the said house were broken down upon or about the 8th day of November 1600 in the nighttime, and the ropes of the coal pit cut in pieces, and the rowel of the pit cast down into the bottom, and some of the sheaths, frame, or timber work of the coal pit broke or cut and cast down. But by what means the same was done, or what persons did the same, I cannot depose. I do not know of my own knowledge, nor by the confession of any, nor by credible report who did or procured all or any of those matters. I was not at the doing thereof, nor procured the same to be done by any person or persons.
I know that the complainant upon the drowning of the pit at Jesmond did cause another new shaft or pit to be sunk in another part of his grounds at Jesmond, and further too I cannot depose other than by report.
Oh, sorry. Did Robert Dent, George Dent, and John Dent, in the 41st year of Her Majesty's reign, draw their weapons upon the sand hill in Newcastle upon Tyne, and therewithal assault and strike at Richard Pitts, Her Majesty's customer in Newcastle, being then in peaceable manner walking in his gown? And how were the Dents then weaponed, and what wounds or hurts did they give unto the said Pitts at the time? And did you, Robert Dent, animate, command, or encourage them, in or any of them that assaulted or wounded Pitts, to do the same, yea or no? And whether were the said Dents censured and fined at York for their misdemeanor, yea or no?
Touching supposed riot and assault supposed to be made by me and George Dent and John Dent upon the sand hill in Newcastle upon Tyne, upon Richard Pitts, Her Majesty's customer of Newcastle, I think I have already sufficiently answered thereto in my answer made to the bill of complaint in this honourable court, and therein I refer myself to the opinion of this honourable court, and therefore I do now refuse to make any further answer to that point.
Item: whether were the aldermen of Newcastle or any of them present when the Dents offered violence to Pitts? And did they then require the Dents to put up their swords and to keep Her Majesty's peace? And did the Dents, notwithstanding, continue their outrage against the Pitts? And did they or any of them then offer any violence to the magistrates?
I do not know that any of the aldermen of Newcastle were present when the assault was made upon Pitts. But shortly after, I saw one of the aldermen near to the same place where the said assault was made. But what speeches the alderman or any other then used, I do not know, because presently I and the said George Dent and John Dent were violently pursued by some of the townsmen, that we could not attend to hear what was then spoken, but were driven for fear of their lives to seek means to escape. Neither did I and George Dent and John Dent continue any further outrage against Pitts, nor offer any violence to the magistrates, as is supposed by this.
I was at the beginning of the affray mentioned, and I heard say there was an alderman there afore the affray was ended. But what he said I cannot depose because I was sore wounded and fell down, and lay for a long time after and never spoke word. And further to that I cannot depose.
Item: where were you all that night that the plaintiff's pit was broken or cut down in Jesmond? And were you not forth of your beds and the houses where you should have laid the most part of the night, being the 8th of November last past?
I lay, to the best of my remembrance, all that night in the house of George Dent the elder, my father in Newcastle, that the complainant, Robert Brandling's pit was broken or cut down in Jesmond in the county of Northumberland. And to the best of my remembrance, I was not forth out of my bed in my father's house, where I did lie all that night, being the 8th day of November now last past.
I did lie in my bed at St. Lawrence all that night. The complainant's pit was broken or cut down in Jesmond, and I was not out of my bed in mine own house at St. Lawrence, being the 8th day of November last past, all that same night.
Item: what rewards or benefits were you promised by the said Dents or Osborne, and which of them for any of the aforesaid practices? And were you not promised by Robert Dent that he would be your warrant and discharge you of all suit in question, that the complainant should have against you for all or any aforesaid misdemeanors in all the former interrogatories specified? And hath he not done so accordingly? And was not these your answers drawn by Robert Dent's direction and his charges? If not, who drew your answers or charges, and were they drawn on at your direction, and the charge declare the truth therein?
My answer was drawn by John Brown, counsellor, at my own charges, and I had not any penny charges by Robert Dent promised or given, nor direction from him, nor received any benefit at all of Robert Dent concerning this suit.
Neither Dent nor Osborne ever promised me any rewards or benefits for any of the practices mentioned. And I was never promised by Robert Dent that he would be my warrant to discharge me of all the suit that the complainant should have against me for all or any of the misdemeanors in the interrogatory mentioned. And my answer was drawn by John Brown, counsellor, which I requested Robert Dent to do, and to get it drawn with the other defendants, and I would pay the charges of the same.
I know not by whose means my answer was drawn, or who drew the same.
I know not by whose means my answer was drawn, nor who drew the same. Well, thank you very much. Heavy work. I noticed that Eric has been doing his usual excellent job in chat by trawling the National Archives database and coming up with an enormous number of cases involving our friend, the complainant Brandling, who seems to have got on the wrong side of everybody in the county.
Yeah, he made lots of enemies somehow.
Well, probably wasn't difficult, Alan.
Well, I suspect one motivation might be, given that Brandling is a knight, whether this is inherited privilege versus nouveau riche.
Well, the class, I know that class antagonisms is what history is theoretically all about. But honestly, there are other reasons. I don't think we can ascribe this to class antagonism, just because it's there. Liza.
Being a knight isn't inherited privilege, is it? Being a lord is inherited privilege. Right. Being a gentleman is inherited, but being a knight is specifically given to a person during their lifetime and isn't passed on.
Right. That is totally correct. Alan.
Unless, of course, it's a baronetage.
Ah, but you've forgotten the date.
Baronets
hadn't been invented.
Did it not? Oh, right.
No, it was James the First. He discovered this absolutely super way of raising revenue. You could take all sorts of gentlemen and make them, by payment of money, instantly superior to all of their neighbors.
Yeah, didn't Ben Jonson make a joke about that got him censored?
I imagine most people were making, those who weren't making jokes about the Scots were making jokes about baronets, yes.
I think it's in Eastward Ho. A Scottish character says about someone else, "Oh, I know him. He's one of my 30-pound knights."
Yeah. Well, if you look at any person in any list of county notables, there are a number of things you can say about your late Elizabethan, early Jacobean gentleman. One is that his mother was a Catholic. Another is that he died in debt. And the third is that he was knighted in 1603. I mean, when James came south, if it moved, he knighted it. Provided it was male, of course. But
because then the knight was obliged to make a little cash gift, right?
Oh, of course. But not only that, it was something he could do which gave pleasure and didn't cost him. Yeah. And he was on his way south. He was a kid in a sweet shop. Yeah. Yes. And he was under the impression that the Crown of England was rich. He was in for a nasty shock.
And he never really quite outgrew that delusion either. Right?
No,
I mean,
no.
he overspent his income his entire reign, is my impression. But he's not king yet.
Yeah.
And Elizabeth is kind of notoriously miserly.
Yes. So, and with knighthoods, she was very reluctant to hand out knighthoods.
That's interesting. So, I did not know that about her. I know that when What's His Noodle was in Essex was in Ireland and knighting everybody right and left, that Elizabeth was not happy about that.
Absolutely, yes.
So we don't know how Brandling became a knight. What did he do to deserve that?
I don't know. A local historian would be able to tell you. It may
Historian
be
of the North. Get on it.
Yeah. We need our local historian, Eric.
Yeah, frustratingly, there was this, I don't know, obviously on the National Archives database website, can't remember what it's called now.
Discovery.
Yes, thank you, Discovery. It kind of just goes, yes, all these Star Chamber records exist, but we can't read them because they're, there's no description. It's just, okay, there's a file. And also another equally frustrating thing is that there's some entire bundle of stuff by the Brandling family from around this period, but it's in the Northumberland archives and we can't access it online.
Well, there you go. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I'm so pleased that when documents go to America, because then the chances are they'll be scanned and put online. But
we're into that.
Yeah, but the no, I mean, if you want, there's no point in going to Discovery for Star Chamber Elizabeth. you need to go to the University of Houston, the WALT, W-A-A-L-T website, the one I'm involved in, because all the data that you need is there. Or no, none of the data that you need is there, but all the data that is known is there. And it improves every day. Yeah. Rachael.
No, I don't. But it's the old coal mine that went, or coal pit that went. It makes me wonder about the actual upkeep of the pit and if it was properly, like, were there codes for mining back then, or were there people who inspected those things, or was it back now?
Health and safety didn't exist.
Yeah, well, yes, it did in the form of deodand, because anything that caused a death was forfeit to the crown. So there was always that. But
yeah, and miners, you had to serve an apprenticeship to be a miner, right? You couldn't just have any dude with a spade dig out your pit.
Explain to me why not.
Would the guild not protect it?
I don't think there was a guild of mine workers at this stage. It was a relatively new trade.
Huh.
I mean, I think coal had always been picked up when it was on the seashore and when it was, up on the ground. But I think the digging of it was, within 50 years. Alan.
Yeah, I mean, that goes back the comment you made at the beginning about sea coal. Originally, it was called sea coal because it was actually picked up by hand on the beaches where it had washed out of the cliffs. And it was only when that supply started to run low compared to the demand that extracting it became the business that it became.
But all the expertise in mining was German, but that was mining for metals rather than coal. But I mean, the principles were the same: getting down there and drainage and pit props and all the timber that you needed to put on the edge on your shaft so that it didn't fall in. Alan.
Yeah, the other one that occurred to me was there's mention of an engine for the extraction of water from the works. 1600 is a very early date for that. And that would certainly not have been a fueled engine, I don't think, at that time. It was, I think we're about 100 years before the work mainly in Cornwall, which is where a lot of the pumping engines were developed. And, a lot of Watt's original work was in improving those engines to make them considerably more efficient.
I think the word engine here means something that has been put together ingeniously.
A machine.
Yeah, but some kind of water screw or something. Yeah.
Or a pump.
Yeah, hand pump.
Yeah.
It's unlikely to be an engine in the sense we would use it today.
Oh, yeah.
And they only had one. So the one mine was obviously failing. Did you notice that Osborne went under the river to get to his own mine because he would have had to go a long way around for a bridge? So obviously there was a way through between the two mines.
Yeah.
This is the one he dammed up when one was flooded, because he'd taken a shortcut through one mine into the other.
Yeah, that was really interesting, I thought.
Yeah.
The other thing I was sort of wondering about, they talk about like an upper and lower pit, and I'm thinking that must mean upstream and downstream of the river. So they're moving from upstream to downstream. That seems a little counterintuitive.
Different river though.
One
is the Usborne. I wish I knew how that's locally pronounced, but no doubt we're getting it very wrong.
Usburn, I suspect.
Well, if you've transcribed the orthography correctly, as I have no doubt you have, one of the spellings is Useburne, which would seem to indicate Oosburn, or maybe the Scots narrowed it to Oosburn.
Yeah,
Oosburn. There's a river that runs through York called the River Ouse. In fact, there are several rivers called Ouse. So
in some early language, ooze meant river, just as Avon meant river somewhere down in the south.
Okay, so the Oosburn could be a side stream of one of the rivers Ouse.
Well, I don't know about that, but it seems definitely to be a tributary of the Tyne.
Possibly. I mean, once again, oh God, send us a local historian.
If I had another penny, I would have another gill. I would make the piper play the bonny lass of Biker Hill.
Yes, well, let's have a local historian for every county. If any local historians are listening to this and would like to join in when their county is being discussed, tell me.
Please
put it in the comments below. Eric.
There does seem to be me being the nerd, an exchequer case about concerning the defendant's jurisdiction, therefore, Sir Robert Brandling, over Jesmond Field in manor of Biker in the parish of St Andrew, Newcastle on Tyne, Northumberland. But yeah, it's not obviously online. It's got the interrogatories and the depositions, but it's exchequer, not Star Chamber.
Well, no. I mean, there are a couple of references in Star Chamber, and I mean, everybody, once you get the habit of litigation, you're all over the place. I mean, lawyers must have really been making money.
So no change there then.
Well, yeah, except that, oh, well, no, let's not get onto the current problems of the English legal system. Yes. So, Aliki.
I'm just going to say it might be based on no evidence at all and just my having read The Accused, but I'm inclined to think that Sir, what's-his-name, Brandling was in the habit of vexatiously litigating his neighbors. My mind flooded, it's your fault.
This is perfectly possible. He certainly doesn't appear to have had any interest at all in the fight with the customer pit in Newcastle. I mean, he doesn't say he was there. He doesn't say he was in any way involved. So why he's brought it in, I don't know. Well, I do know, but yes, Rachael.
Yeah, I really think there's I mean, even if there's a connection physically between these two mines, I think for perhaps the time building some of this mine going under a river is maybe a little dangerous. And if he hasn't upkept the mine, it's not unnatural that the water wearing away, coal's, to my memory, isn't a super hard rock type material. It could just have worn away into his mine shaft and just be a natural disaster and to his own fault. And him bringing up that some people are Scots, or that I think there was something else that he brought up about them, that it's just a way of blaming somebody who's foreign or that he considers foreign and not English, like for his own his own not keeping his side of the yard clean or whatever.
I mean, you've got to remember that these are all borderers. And consequently, they are at a state have been in a state of war for 100 years. And also that once the border lawlessness didn't exist, they all went off to America. Well, not immediately. They started it by going to Northern Ireland and bringing peace to that part of the world. And then when Northern Ireland got a bit quieter, they all went west.
Yes. Hello, my ancestors.
Yes, the Grahams. Grahams are a terrible bunch.
Notorious.
I mean, notorious for it.
They got kicked out of Scotland at one point.
Yes, the Grahams, the Nixons, the Johnsons, they all set off and became horse thieves, cattle rustlers, and of course miners. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. So just north of Newcastle, how far is Newcastle from the border? Because either side of the border, there's like the debatable lands.
Yes, Newcastle is south of the debatable lands. The border is, Hadrian's Wall went straight across, but the actual border is more like that. Berwick is the border town, sometimes Scots, sometimes English. Currently, I think English, but
it is English, but it's only 10-15 miles north of Newcastle.
Is that all?
It's
I
relatively close.
Oh, I thought it was more.
So it's less than a day's march.
Well, certainly, I mean, the Scots could fairly easily come south. And did. But there were Scottish coal mines. Some of the first coal mines in Britain were actually in the county of Fife. The Kingdom of Fife, I beg its pardon, which is sort of the east coast just north of Edinburgh.
Yeah, large, important place.
And they use the coal to make salt as well. People are asking about what happened to the what to read. Eric says, this is a story I must hear. There's a book called The Steel Bonnets by George MacDonald Fraser, the man who wrote the Flashman books. And this is a history book, a popular history book. It's very, very well worth reading. And it's about the problems of living on the border. The Steel Bonnets. Okay, now, is there anybody else who has anything else to say, or shall we bring this to an end? Good, because I think we've done a great job here. Well, thank you very much to all these totally wonderful and generous readers, and thank you all for listening. And I have to give you the final admonition, as it is your bounden duty daily to pray for the Queen. Goodbye.